So we talked about freeze last week, and that was new to me.
Yeah, me too.
So I was talking to a friend of mine, and she mentioned FAWN response, and I was like, whoa, there's another one? I've never heard this. So it's pretty interesting.
It's pretty cool. So in a therapy session is where I heard about freeze, and we talked about that in the freeze episode. And then when your friend talked about FAWN, and I looked that up, I like this one because I feel like this one is going to be the most relatable,
I feel like it's going to be pretty prevalent, right?
Yeah, like when we thought of freeze, it's like you see a bear and you freeze.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like the scary movies when you're like, oh, that's stupid. That wouldn't happen. I'd be running. And you might actually freeze.
Yeah.
Now, FAWN is kind of more practical, or not practical, but it's kind of more relatable in the real world.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are actually living in a FAWN response to stress or trauma on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and guess what? It might not be helping you focus.
Yeah, so here's a couple of definitions from different people before we get into, some what it looks like. But this is by Pete Walker, psychotherapist and author of Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. This is what he wrote. The FAWN response is a response to a threat by becoming more appealing to the threat. Which is really interesting.
Wow. That's definitely some next level like survival tactic.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about these stress responses aren't all negative, right? Like, again, if a bear attacks you, I think you're supposed to freeze with a black bear. I don't really know.
Yeah, so fawning refers to consistently abandoning your own needs to serve others to avoid conflict, criticism, or disapproval.
When I read this, I was like,
real life shit alert.
This is, and again, it's not black or white, right? It's not like you either are living in a FAWN response or you are not. I think it's more situational.
Situational and with certain people.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yes, that's a really good point. And we'll get into that, where the FAWN response typically comes from. But I think you're exactly right. Like if, let's say you had a really bad parent and then you got a boss that kind of reminds you of that person, and so you may revert back to something like a FAWN response.
Yeah, it looks like it's also sometimes called the please and appease response, and is associated with people pleasing and codependency. Ouch.
Yeah. So in the tragic example of this, you know, when you think about when you see someone who has an abusive spouse and they're constantly trying to appease that spouse. Yeah. You know, they're almost stuck in that loop where it's safer, they feel, if they appease that person.
Yeah, than to resist, because then that just makes life more difficult.
Yeah. I think a positive response to this is when you see videos of, like, you know, someone come in who maybe a narcissist serial killer. And
always to the most extreme. I like it.
And the person like starts appeasing their ego. Yeah. You know, like you've seen these movies where like,
so you don't get killed.
Yeah. Like the chick, like kind of, she senses that he's going to attack her. So she, you know, kind of flirts with him. And then as soon as he's unprepared, she like, you know, stabs him in the throat. Like, I think that's a
strategic conscious use of the FAWN.
Yeah.
I think the cousin to the FAWN response might be like Stockholm syndrome.
Ooh, yeah. So why do we revert to the FAWN response?
So why do we do anything in life? I think a lot of it can come back to this childhood trauma.
Yeah.
Childhood trauma, complex trauma.
Yeah. So this is like war trauma, or like sustained childhood trauma is pretty specific, obviously, because you're a child. So there's not a lot you can do in that situation. But let's say you're older and, you know, you're in a very abusive relationship for a period of time, or, you know, you served and you're in a pretty terrible climate in a military context. These are things that may trigger the FAWN response over time. And then this is pretty interesting. So I went a little deeper on this. Fawning is particularly linked with relational trauma, or trauma that occurred in a context of relationship. So there's a couple subsets of this.
This makes sense.
Yeah, like We'll go a little deeper, but the 3 under relational trauma is abuse, neglect, and enmeshment. So abuse, harmful experience that could be physical, sexual, or emotional in nature. That makes sense.
Neglect, trauma as a result of things that didn't happen, such as physical or emotional neglect.
Yeah. And then enmeshment.
A lack of boundaries between family members that can impair a child's independence and sense of self.
Yeah, so when I read that, I was like, this is pretty interesting. I like this. So in understanding enmeshment, I'd never heard that word before.
Neither have I.
So again, kind of in our hierarchy here, we've got the FAWN response. The FAWN response typically is linked to relational trauma. Under relational trauma, we have enmeshment. So enmeshment is a description of a relationship between 2 or more people in which personal boundaries are permeable and unclear. So picture a kid in a house where no matter what they do, they can't do the right thing. But they never, the parents never are clear about what the right thing is.
Wow. That sounds horrible.
Yeah. So you and again, if you think about the end result is over pleasing, overly trying to please, because you were in this relationship for a period of time where it just totally screwed up your mind. Like there was no clear direction in how to get affection from this person. And you just, it put you in this state of constantly trying to appease and please.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of see these joking memes about like Asian fathers, no matter what, it's never enough.
Yes.
It's like,
oh yeah,
you made a B, why did you make a B?
Right.
Why not straight A's?
Yeah.
Why aren't you becoming a doctor, lawyer?
Right.
All those kind of things.
Yeah, no matter what.
So then you might end up spending your whole life trying to do everything for one person.
It's funny that you say that because I was watching Next in Fashion last night.
I don't even know what that is.
What's really what you just said, the one who won the entire show out of like 20 contestants or whatever, she was Korean.
Oh wow.
But she kept talking about she was doubting her designs over and over again. She was constantly saying like, this isn't good enough, and I don't know if I'm good enough, and I'm not sure if I'm capable. And like all the way the thread through the entire show was just her not living up
to what she wanted,
to whatever expectation that she thought she had from her family.
You know what the twisted, sad thing is about that? A lot of times those kind of people do create the best thing.
I know.
They end up because it's never enough.
Their mental torture.
You push yourself to the absolute boundaries of sanity, trying to create things, and then the sad, twisted truth is they'll end up creating sometimes the best stuff, the best music, the best inventions, the best everything, because it's never good enough.
It's true, and a lot of the music that we love and adore is like tormented souls
who are like perfectionists.
Yeah.